Hi, I'm Maynard. My sister told me to go fix a vent somewhere else, then kicked me out of Thanksgiving. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing it wasn't the first time she'd erased me, just the first time she did it out loud. They took my money, my silence, even my seat at the table, all while smiling for family photos I was never in. Now, I'm left wondering, how long had I been funding the life that didn't include me? And what happens when the quiet one finally pulls the plug? The air smelled like cinnamon candles and roasted turkey when I pulled into the driveway. Callista always went overboard with decor-matching gold napkin rings, ceramic pumpkin centerpieces, name cards even. I had parked behind Beckham's dark sedan, freshly detailed, not a smudge on the finish. Mine was dusty, tools still in the back from an early morning job. I sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching through the windshield. Laughter filtered from inside. I could already hear Callista's high-pitched giggle, unmistakable. I glanced at the wine bottle on the passenger seat, an Oregon Pinot Noir. ED asked the wine shop to help me pick. It wasn't cheap, but it felt like something a respectable guest would bring. 3 days before Thanksgiving, and here I was, early, ready, dressed in my nicest dark jeans and a soft burgundy sweater, a small silver pendant around my neck. I'd even taken the afternoon off, left my crew with bonuses and clear instructions. No calls today. Today was about family. Or so I kept telling myself. Inside, I was greeted with a mix of glances, some warm, others evaluative. Callista floated across the room in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent in trade school. She hugged me quickly, her cheek barely brushing mine. "You made it," she said like I'd RSVP'd to a networking mixer. "Yay," I replied. "Wouldn't miss it." I handed her the wine. She raised an eyebrow. "Nice pick." Then she handed it off to Beckham without a second glance. He offered a half smile, and I caught the faintest flicker of confusion in his eyes, like he wasn't sure who I was. Marisur mother came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Maynard, sweetheart, can you help slice the bread?" Of course I could. In the kitchen, I set to work. I knew my way around this counter better than anyone. It helped build it. Literally, financed the remodel 5 years ago when Mom's old countertops were chipping apart. No one mentioned that now. Callista hovered nearby, wine glass in hand, chatting with Beckham and one of his law firm friends. I reached for the bread knife just as she said loudly, "Can someone tell her to go fix a vent or something? This isn't a service call." The room quieted. A few chuckles, then silence. My hand paused over the cutting board. I didn't look up. I didn't have to. I could feel it, Beckham's awkward shifting, the friend's uncomfortable smirk, Mom's lack of response. No defense, no correction, just air thick with implication. In that moment, I became the punchline in my own home. I finished slicing, placed the bread into the warmed basket, and set it gently on the table. Nobody thanked me. Dinner was announced with fanfare. Callista led everyone to the formal dining room, gestures grand, voice bright. I lingered, waiting to see where I'd be seated. My name wasn't on the main table. I checked twice. Maris approached, touching my arm lightly. "Maynard, would you mind letting Mr. Keller sit there?" He is Callista's mentor. "You can grab a plate and join the kids at the island." "The kids?" I asked, not sure I heard right. "The kitchen island," she said gently, as if that softened it. "You don't mind, do you?" I looked around. No one objected. Not Callista, not Beckham, not anyone. So I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a plate, and sat at the end of the counter beside 2 high schoolers and our cousin's moody preteen. From my seat, I could see the dining table. Polished, perfect, full of people dressed in tailored clothing, laughing like a magazine ad. I watched them clink glasses above the very table I had helped pay for during the remodel, a table I was no longer welcome to sit at. I ate quietly. The food tasted fine. It always did. Callista was many things, and an overachieving hostess was one of them. They didn't look over once. After dessert, I helped with dishes without being asked, then slipped away before anyone could offer the obligatory thanks for coming. I climbed into my truck, hands cold despite the heater running. The neighborhood had gone still, porch lights flickering on, kids tucked inside, music playing faintly from another house nearby. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't text anyone to say what happened. I just sat there, still, because silence was something I had learned to wear like a second skin. And tonight, it fit too well. I didn't drive off right away. I sat there in the truck with the engine running, staring out at the house where everyone I was supposed to matter to had already moved on without me. The lights inside glowed warm and gold, shadows flickering as people passed by the windows. I could hear faint echoes of laughter when the wind shifted just right. They'd moved on to dessert, maybe coffee, maybe toasts. I was gone, and not one person had noticed. I didn't text anyone to say goodbye. No one reached out to ask if I was okay or where I'd gone. For all they knew, I could have been in a ditch somewhere. Or maybe they knew exactly where I was, right outside, but didn't think I was worth the trouble. My phone buzzed. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was Maris, or even Callista. Maybe someone had come to their senses. It was Callista. I opened the message and read it once, then again. Next time, try not to look like HVAC. Kinda messed up the vibe. There was no emoji, no sarcasm tag. Just those words, short, clean, cruel. I didn't reply. I didn't delete it either. I just stared at the screen, letting the glow wash over my face. It felt like something inside me had shifted, but not broken. More like it rearranged itself, like a bridge giving way after too many years of unspoken weight. Instead of crying, I turned on the radio. Static. I flipped through stations until I landed on a classical piece I didn't recognize. Violins, maybe. Something slow and sweeping. I let it play in the background while I opened Instagram. I shouldn't have, but I did. Callista had already posted a full photo carousel. The caption read, "Grateful for every person at this table. Family is everything." Slide 1. Callista and Beckham, arms linked, both glowing like a Macy's window. Slide 2. Maris at the head of the table, smiling beside Mr. Keller. Slide 3, the group shot, the whole family apparently. Except I wasn't in it. I blinked. I remembered posing for that picture. I remembered standing between Aunt Val and my cousin Lenny. I remembered smiling, fake but full, because that's what you do for a family photo. And yet, here I was, scrolling through evidence that I hadn't existed. Either they'd retaken it after I left, or they'd cropped me out. Either way, the message was loud and clear. The comments rolled in. Such a beautiful family. Goals. Everyone looks so happy. I closed the app, my thumb shaking slightly, then opened the camera roll on my phone. I searched Thanksgiving. Last year, the year before. There were photos, plenty of them. Callista cutting pies, Beckham holding wine glasses, Maris arranging napkins like flower petals. But in all those photos, one thing stayed the same. I was always behind the camera, never in front of it. A few had my hand in the corner, my wrist maybe, the back of my head once. But not my face, not me. I remembered helping host last year's dinner because Callista was swamped with finals. I remembered making the cranberry sauce from scratch, the one Dad used to love. He wasn't around anymore, but I'd done it anyway, for tradition, for the illusion of mattering, and not one image existed to prove it ever been there. I scrolled back further, hoping to disprove the narrative building in my head. I wanted to find just one picture, one where I was laughing, or holding a plate, or standing in the background. But year after year, all I found were gaps. Space where I should have been. This wasn't new. What was new was that I saw it now, for what it was. Not an oversight, not a coincidence. It was a pattern, a decision. They didn't want to remember me, and deep down, I had stopped asking them to. I turned off my phone and stared at the black screen. My own reflection looked back at me, tired and unsmiling. No foundation, no gloss, just me. The version they didn't want seated at the table or shown to the world. I rolled down the window and let the air in. It was sharp, with that crisp, pine needle edge that only Idaho nights seem to carry in late November. It smelled like smoke and stars, and something I couldn't name. I wasn't just missing from the photo. I was never meant to be in the frame at all. The morning light in Boise has a strange way of feeling honest, like it's not going to sugarcoat anything for you. I woke to it seeping through the blinds, slanting across the cracked windowsill in my apartment above the shop. The heater clicked on with a grumble. It didn't help the cold that had settled in me overnight. My phone was face down on the nightstand, but I already knew what it'd see. Still, I picked it up. No missed calls, no texts, no one asking where I went. No one even pretending to notice I had left mid-meal and vanished into the night. I made coffee without really tasting it. My fingers moved through muscle memory filter, scoop, water, press, but my thoughts were somewhere else. I checked my email, mostly invoices and spam. Then I glanced at the whiteboard hanging above my small kitchen table. It listed all the weekend appointments I had personally rearranged so I could be free for Thanksgiving. And for what? I flipped open my laptop. I wasn't sure why. Just something to do while the coffee cooled. The screen blinked to life, and with it came a memory from the night before, the conversation that had slipped under my skin like a splinter. Callista's voice, all polished and poised. A guest had asked how she managed to get through law school without debt. She smiled and said, "My parents are angels. Always made sure I had what I needed." That moment hadn't hit me then, not fully. I had been too focused on keeping my hands from trembling while I carried dishes. But now, in the quiet of my apartment, it landed. They erased me. Even in their praise, I didn't exist. All those payments I had made, the textbooks, the housing deposits, the semester fees all slipped neatly into some invisible drawer labeled parental support. And she let them, smiled through it, let people believe the story she thought was prettier. I stood, suddenly needing air. I opened the window. The city below was just waking up, the muffled sounds of trucks, a dog barking somewhere down the alley. Leaning against the windowsill, I thought about the dress, the one I wore to dinner. It had belonged to our grandmother. A soft floral pattern, old-fashioned but meaningful. It was something she wore every Thanksgiving. I'd kept it for years, only pulling it out for special family gatherings. I remembered walking into the kitchen, and Callista whispering to Maris, just loud enough for me to hear, "Next time, maybe she shouldn't wear upholstery." They laughed. I pretended not to hear. But I did. I always do. I pulled the dress from the laundry bag hanging on the bathroom door. The fabric still carried the faint scent of roasted rosemary and clove. I sat on the edge of the bed and laid it across my lap. It felt heavier than I remembered. Not physically, but in memory. It wasn't just a dress. It was a legacy they didn't want me to be part of. I ran my fingers along the seam that I had mended last year by hand. That little tear under the sleeve, where the stitching had come loose after decades of use. I had fixed it, delicately, with care. Just like I had tried to fix everything else in that family, but no one remembered that part. I placed the dress back in its garment bag and zipped it shut. My phone lit up again, not with a message, but with a photo notification. Another post from Callista. A boomerang of her and Beckham clinking glasses, captioned, "Nothing like family." Family! I stared at that word until it blurred. Scrolling back through her timeline, I noticed how I'd never been tagged. Not in birthdays, not in holidays. Not even in the post she made last year after I paid her tuition in full for spring semester. She'd posted a picture of her holding a Starbucks cup, captioned, "Cheers to working hard and making things happen." I was a ghost in my own generosity. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. The way she dodged questions about where her support came from. How she never introduced me to people unless forced. When she did, it was always vague. "This is my sister," with a tone that suggested the word could mean anything. I had let it slide. Every time. Told myself it wasn't worth making a scene, that I wasn't doing any of this for credit. But maybe I should have asked why credit was such a dirty word only when it was about me. I set my phone down and reached for a notepad on my counter. Scribbled 3 words at the top. Start writing back. It wasn't just hurt anymore. It was recognition. If they could build a perfect story without me, then maybe I was never meant to be in their ending. I didn't send the letter, but I made one change they couldn't ignore. Sunday afternoons in Boise moved slower than the rest of the week. The streets had a hush to them, like even the concrete needed a breather. I met Lydia at the corner cafe, the one with those wobbly patio chairs and the smell of burnt espresso trapped in the wood. She was already seated with her latte, flipping through something on her phone when I arrived. We hugged in that awkward shoulder-tap way people do when they've grown distant, but haven't admitted it. I sat across from her, wrapping my fingers around the warm ceramic mug I'd ordered more out of habit than desire. We talked about nothing first. The weather, work, a recall on some car part her husband was annoyed about. Then, like a train switching tracks, she looked up and said, "Callista's really stressed, Del. You know how she gets with pressure. It probably wasn't personal." I stirred my coffee slowly. It wasn't pressure that made her lie. Lydia didn't answer. She just sighed, then tapped her screen and turned it toward me. "Did you see the toast?" The video played without sound at first, and that was almost enough. Callista stood at the head of the dining table like it was a podium, her glass raised, her face glowing with self-certainty. Lydia turned the sound on. "I just want to thank everyone who made this dinner possible. And a special shout-out to my little sister, our behind-the-scenes logistics queen, always making things flow. No name, no camera pan, no gesture in my direction. I wasn't family, I was function." "She meant well," Lydia said softly. "You know she loves you." "Do I?" I took a slow sip and set my cup down. Because what I saw was a woman proud to edit me out of her own fairy tale. Lydia didn't argue. Maybe she wanted to. Maybe she just didn't know how. We parted with a tight smile and empty words. Let's do this again sometime. We both knew we wouldn't. Later, at the supply store, I ran into Beckham. I'd come for couplings and vent sealant, but found him near the checkout with a box of light bulbs and some organic oat milk. He recognized me right away and waved. "Hey," he said with that lawyer charm smile. "Still doing the vents for your mom's place? They said you're like the go-to maintenance gal." I blinked once. That smile didn't fade. "No," I replied calmly, evenly. "I own an HVAC business. I don't do vents. I manage a full-service team and have a contract with the city on top of residential work." "Oh, right. I didn't mean anything by it." "I know," I said, and let the words hang there. I didn't need to explain the difference between a sister and a servant. He wouldn't get it. He wasn't supposed to. They knew who I was, I thought, walking out the door with my materials in hand. They just didn't want that version of me in the room. Back at home, I dropped the parts on the kitchen counter and sat at my desk. The laptop opened with a whisper. I hadn't planned on writing anything, but the words started before I could stop them. "Dear Callista, it's easy to forget who keeps the machine running when you've only ever been handed the keys. I've spent years helping you without asking for thanks, without making a scene, without needing a spotlight. But I won't stay invisible while you rewrite history. If you keep removing me from your narrative, I will remove my support from yours." I stared at the cursor blinking at the bottom of the draft. The screen glowed soft against the darkening sky outside. I read the message once, twice. Then I clicked save. Not send. Not yet. But it sat there. A digital boundary line. A mirror waiting to be held up. And in that silence between restraint and action, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. I didn't send the letter, but I made one change they couldn't ignore. It was nearly midnight when I sat down at my kitchen table, the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock my only company. The draft I'd saved from yesterday glowed on the screen, a message still unsent, just a warning written in plain type. But sometimes, words weren't the weapon. Action was. I logged into the university's payment portal. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. Username, password, 2-step verification. Then the dashboard loaded. Her name stared back at me. Callista Maurice Callahan, listed under sponsored accounts. My account, my money, my decision. The cursor hovered over the payment method. There was a small gray link next to it. Remove payer. I clicked it. The page blinked. Are you sure? It asked. Yes. My heart didn't race. There was no dramatic exhale, just a quiet internal shift, like a door finally closing on a drafty hallway that had always stayed just a little too cold. I didn't celebrate. I didn't even smile. Instead, I stood, walked over to the stove, and made myself a mug of mint tea. Something to mark the moment soft, clean, forgettable to anyone else. But to me, it felt like reclaiming oxygen. It wasn't revenge. I was just done. Back at my laptop, I minimized the payment portal and opened an old folder I hadn't touched in weeks, voice memos. I'd used it to record meetings, contractor walkthroughs, client quotes, practical stuff. But one file sat in there with a vague title, Kitchen Thursday. I didn't even remember hitting record. I clicked play. Callista's voice came through first, crisp and careless. Maynard's just HVAS. I told Mom she doesn't fit the crowd this year. Someone laughed in the background. Maybe Maris, maybe not. That was all it took. I didn't pause it. I didn't play it again. I just sat back, let the words soak through. My jaw didn't clench. My eyes didn't sting. It wasn't the worst thing she'd ever said. But hearing it out loud, not imagined, not implied, was a confirmation. A receipt. I renamed the file, Proof.mp3. Then I forwarded it to one person. No subject line, no message, just the file, Maris. I knew she would listen to it. She always said she hated gossip, but never turned down a piece of context. I waited less than an hour. The phone rang. Her name lit up on the screen, same as it had every time she'd called me to ask for a favor, a ride, a check written without questions. This time, I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. And again. I picked it up on the fourth try. Didn't say hello, just waited. Maris' voice came sharp, already wound up. Maynard, what the hell is this? You listened, I said evenly. What do you want me to do with this? She was venting. She didn't mean it. She meant every word, I replied. She's your sister. She's your daughter, I corrected, because at that moment, I wasn't sure I still wanted to claim the title. Maris huffed. This isn't how family handles things. No, I agreed. This is how people who've been used without acknowledgement finally stop being used. I hung up. She didn't call back. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was earned. It wasn't lonely, it was mine. I sat back, pulled the tea to my lips. Lukewarm now, but still familiar. The apartment was quiet again, humming in low tones, a comfort I'd built for myself. Sometimes the loudest decision is made in a whisper, or a click, and this one echoed louder than anything I could have screamed. They thought it'd disappear quietly. What they didn't expect was it'd take the foundation with me. Tuesday crept in with that thick, low Idaho scythe kind that makes everything feel like it's about to break. I showed up at the office an hour earlier than usual. Not because there was anything urgent, just because silence at home had started sounding more like accusation than peace. Work, at least, had rules. Physics. Process. You tighten the bolt. The machine works. You find the leak. You fix it. Nothing petty. Nothing performative. I was elbow deep in a stack of invoices when Taylor, my youngest technician smart, observant, kind stood awkwardly in the doorway. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip, holding her phone like it was radioactive. I know this isn't really my business, she said gently. But have you seen Callista's story? My jaw tightened, but I nodded. Show me. She handed over her phone with care, like she was passing me a wound I'd have to dress myself. And there it was, Callista's signature drama. Black background, white bold font. Some people love money more than family. Sad, no tags, no names, just poison, thinly veiled. But I didn't need a name. I knew who she meant. And so did everyone else in her curated little world. The comments felt like being slapped in a room full of people who pretended not to notice. You deserve better. You don't need that kind of negativity in your life. Cut the snakes out, Queen. I handed the phone back without flinching. They're not seeing the whole story, I said quietly. Taylor nodded and slipped away, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't blame her. I stayed the rest of the workday out of obligation, finishing every mundane task like I was ticking boxes off a goodbye list. Then I drove home in silence, not even the hum of the radio to distract me. Just the sound of my own clarity, growing louder with every passing block. At home, I opened Instagram not because I cared, but because I knew I had to know. I had to see what story they were building now. Maris had posted a warm-toned photo of her spotless kitchen white counters, polished copper fixtures, her curated life in full display. The caption? Family first. Always. Callista followed with an old photo from her college graduation, posed like she had achieved it with nothing but divine light and hard work. Built by grace, not bitterness. Comments. Disabled. Of course. They weren't telling lies. Not directly. They were telling half-truths designed to paint me out of the frame again, but I didn't reply. I didn't clap back. Instead, I walked over to the kitchen counter where a plain cream-colored envelope sat waiting. I'd bought it earlier that morning from the tiny stationery shop with hand-labeled drawers and bell chimes on the door. It was simple, quiet, like I had been all these years. Inside, I slid a check made out for $0 and a small note card with one single line. This is the last check you'll ever cash from me. My handwriting, my calm, my decision. I sealed the envelope, tucked it into a certified mailer, and drove it to the post office after dark. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly. The clerk didn't even glance up when she stamped the package. It felt right. Back home, I didn't spiral. I got to work. I opened my laptop and started the audit knot of my finances, but of every tie I'd quietly maintained, every convenience I'd funded, every bill with my name, quietly paying for someone else's comfort. Callista's rent deposit? Terminated. Her utilities? Canceled. The Spotify family plan? Trimmed to an Amy. Apple Cloud storage? Revoked. Phone upgrades they'd long forgotten I paid for? Disconnected. I wasn't angry, I was awake. For years they hadn't needed me. They needed the version of me who didn't ask questions, who footed the bills, who bit her tongue at Thanksgiving and smiled through every jab. But I wasn't that woman anymore. By midnight, I had unraveled every cord that tied me to them. Quietly, cleanly. I turned off my phone and sat on the edge of my bed. There was no music, no noise, just stillness, and for once, it wasn't heavy. And then the phone lit up. Maris. Once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. Let it ring until it stopped. She didn't leave a voicemail. I opened my text and typed a sentence. Still think I'm the problem? Sent. No ... No reply. And still no ache. Because this wasn't revenge. It was revelation. I didn't torch the bridge. I just stopped rebuilding it alone. And as I turned the phone over and clicked off the lamp, I finally felt something that had eluded me for years, peace. If they wanted a perfect story, I was finally ready to write the ending they never planned for and never saw coming. It was a gray Thursday morning, the kind where nothing feels urgent, but everything weighs a little heavier. I was at the front desk of the shop, sliding filter boxes onto shelves, double-checking invoice labels, and trying to keep my mind quiet. The scent of metal, paper, and coffee mixed in the air, grounding me in the ordinary. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Isolde. We hadn't not really talked since before Thanksgiving, and even then, it had only been about recipes, links to discount candles, a dumb meme about dishwashing gloves. Things people send when they don't know how to say, I saw what they did to you, and I didn't stop them. The message was short. You didn't have to be so dramatic, you know. Callista's just trying her best. No emojis, no question, no warmth. Just a flat line of condescension disguised as concern. I read it again. Then once more, slower this time. It wasn't just the words. It was the absence of effort. The kind of message that's written by someone more interested in smoothing over discomfort than understanding pain. I didn't reply. But in my head, something clear and bitter surfaced. When silence is easier than defending you, they'll let you burn. I scrolled up through our old thread. There was a picture of her haircut from September, one I had complimented with too much enthusiasm. A snapshot I'd sent her from my shop's opening day, the ribbon, the flowers, my tired smile. And then a voice memo, scratchy but sincere. "You're the rock in my life, Maynard. The steady one. Don't ever change." Funny how people always say that right before they do. I stared at that message until it meant nothing. Then I deleted the thread. No ceremony, no guilt, just space cleared. Like brushing off crumbs from a table you were never really invited to sit at. Around noon, Rowena stopped by. She didn't knock, just walked in like she always did, eyes scanning the room like she could sense something brewing. In one hand, she carried a beat-up red toolbox that had definitely seen better decades. In the other, a small USB drive shaped like a cartoon camera. "From my niece," she said. "She's 9. Thinks she's Spielberg. Recorded the whole dinner from under the table." I raised an eyebrow. "She likes spy movies," Rowena added with a smirk. "You might want to watch it." And that was it. No backstory, no persuasion. She placed the drive on the counter, patted the toolbox like it was a dog, and left. I waited until the shop emptied out. Phones muted. Doors locked. Then I plugged the drive into my laptop, half expecting it to be silly or corrupted, or maybe nothing at all. There were several clips, all time-stamped and slightly shaky, but one stood out. It was labeled, "Thanksgiving Final." Kids always name things like it's the definitive version. No second takes, just one truth, captured. I clicked it open. The video began in chaos, shoes scraping tile, the rustle of napkins, the clinking of cutlery and glasses. The camera was angled upward from beneath the dining table, framed between chair legs and dangling linen. At first, it was just sound. Voices, forks, laughter. Then a sudden tilt brought Callista into view. She was by the dessert table, half a tart in hand, one elbow resting against a chair back like she owned the moment. And then she said it. "I told Mom Maynard's basically staff. I mean, HVAC doesn't photograph well." She laughed. So did the others. Not nervously, not politely, but with the easy cruelty of people who think the person they're mocking won't ever hear them. But I did. I didn't pause. Didn't replay. I just stared. Then minimized the window, copied the file to my desktop, and renamed it. Unedited familyvalues.mp4. There it was, unedited, unfiltered, undeniable. Not a rumor, not a misinterpretation. Just their truth, caught from a low angle they never saw coming. I sat back, the hum of the HVAC unit overhead, whispering like a cruel reminder. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't move. I didn't text Rowena. I didn't blast it on social media. I didn't even tell a soul, not yet. Instead, I spent the rest of the afternoon tidying things no one would see. Backing up folders, labeling receipts, preparing. Because this wasn't about revenge not yet. This was about strategy, the kind of quiet they underestimated, the stillness before the truth walks in. And meanwhile, on the other side of the screen, they kept performing grief and sisterhood like it was a shared Instagram account. Callista had posted a candlelit picture of her and Beckham with a caption, "Some people just walk away, and that's okay." Maris had commented underneath, "God gives you what you need, not what you want." Polished, pious, predictable, fine. Let them keep their manicured captions and filtered devotionals, their curated sadness, their borrowed grace. Because now I had the one thing they couldn't crop, a mirror they couldn't edit. And I hadn't even pressed play on the next chapter yet. Friday morning started like any other, until the shop's mail slot clanked with the sound of something thick sliding through. I glanced up from the counter, where my coffee had just turned drinkable. No return address. Just a cream-colored envelope with a discreet corporate logo stamped in the upper corner. It wasn't a bill. It wasn't personal. It was a student loan provider. One I'd never dealt with, not for myself anyway. I slit the envelope open with the edge of a letter opener, steam rising from my mug as I flipped through the packet. Dense legalese, printed tables, payment terms. Then, midway through the third page, I saw my name. Listed as a cosigner. Borrower, Callista Maris Callahan. Date, 2 years ago. My eyes didn't widen, my hands didn't shake, but something inside me twisted, like I'd been holding onto the edge of a dock and someone kicked me in the ribs. I didn't remember signing anything, not for that. Not then. But there it was, my name, clear as day, digitally stamped onto a signature line I never touched. A forged signature. Crisp, believable, almost smug. They hadn't just borrowed my help. They stole my name and built an entire future out of it. I didn't call her. I didn't even let myself rehearse the conversation. What could she possibly say? That it was a misunderstanding? That I always meant well and would have said yes if she had asked. I didn't need soft lies in a sweet tone. I needed proof. So I spent the rest of the morning in quiet focus. Digging, scanning, printing. Every bank statement, every tuition receipt, every emailed PDF Callista had asked me to look over real quick. One, buried in a cluttered desktop folder from 2021, made me stop cold. It was a financial disclosure form, filed with her university, claiming she was a first-generation student, self-funded, no support from family. A lie. Because I was the support, and I had the loan statement to prove it. Out of habit, I checked the scholarship's official site, the one Callista had gushed over during her acceptance dinner. The guidelines were clear. Applicants must demonstrate financial independence, no significant family assistance. So not only had she lied to me, she'd lied to them. And she'd benefited from it all publicly, loudly, proudly. Scholarships, spotlights. Self-made success posts captioned with emojis and Bible verses. I gathered everything, the forged loan documents, the false financial declarations, the printout from the Scholarship Foundation, and a video Rowena's niece had casually sent me last month, one I hadn't thought much of until now. In it, Callista bragged, almost jokingly, "Honestly, all you need is a good story. They eat that up." I replayed it twice, then labeled the folder. Scholarship Integrity Breach. The meeting wasn't dramatic. No courtroom, no gasp. Just a plain, carpeted office with fluorescent lighting and a tired-looking woman behind a desk. I sat across from her, folder in hand. "I'm not here to destroy her," I said as I passed the file across the table. "But I believe you deserve to know where your investment really went." She didn't rush. She didn't ask questions. She just started reading, eyes narrowing with every page. After a while, she looked up and asked, "Would you like to be informed as this proceeds?" I shook my head. "No. I just wanted the truth to land where it belongs." And that was it. I stood, walked out, and didn't look back. That night, the calls started. My phone buzzed during dinner, 3 missed calls in a row. One from Callista, one from Maris, one from Beckham. I didn't answer, not out of anger, just clarity. I'd said what needed to be said, without speaking a word to them. Instead, I curled up on the couch, laundry half folded beside me, and opened my laptop. A local legal forum I followed posted an update. Scholarship status on temporary hold pending review of submitted financial documents. No names, no specifics, but the timing couldn't have been clearer. The comments started rolling in. Why do people always ruin a good thing with lies? Fraud should be prosecuted like theft. Because it is. Another rags to riches story built on someone else's wallet. I didn't comment, didn't like, didn't repost. I just watched. And for once, the silence didn't feel like a hole or a void or an absence. It felt right. Like a door closing softly behind me. Not slamming, not breaking, just closing. No fireworks, no shouting matches, no scenes worthy of reality TV. Just a slow unraveling, a quiet undoing, a house of cards collapsing under its own arrogance. I pulled a blanket over my lap, letting the last light fade through the windows. The news played in the background, something about thunderstorms and traffic delays. But all I heard was calm. The weight was still there, but it had shifted. Moved to a place I didn't have to carry anymore. Because I didn't start the fire. I just stopped shielding them from the spark. You can lose everything and still not feel free unless you choose to walk away from what broke you. 2 weeks had passed since the file was handed off to the scholarship board. Nothing loud had happened, no press conference, no angry calls to my office from strangers. But Boise has its own quiet way of letting things unravel. The news made it into the sidebar of a regional legal blog. Scholarship revoked following review of eligibility. No names, no photos. But I didn't need the headline to tell me who they meant. I listened to Maris's voicemail once. "You didn't have to go this far." That was all she said. "No hello, no, we need to talk." Just those words, clipped and bitter, like a lid snapping closed on a Tupperware she thought could contain me. I deleted it. Beckham's message came in that evening. Longer, more careful. I didn't know. "I'm ending things with Callista. We can't build a future on a lie." That one I didn't delete. I didn't save it either. The next day, I signed the lease on a second work van used, but solid. I'd been watching it sit at the dealership for a week, waiting for a reason to give myself permission. This was it. I handed over the down payment with a calm I hadn't felt in months. No champagne, no announcement, just action. The new space had been eyeing smaller than I wanted, but with good lighting and a back room, I could turn into a parts inventory station. I took it. Quietly. The lease signed in the same careful pen I'd used on so many checks for them. Progress didn't need applause. It just needed movement. I sent Rowena a handwritten card. Some people show up without needing an invitation. Her reply came a few days later in a small package. A white ceramic mug with block letters. Built, not born. I didn't cry. But I held it for a long time before putting it on the shelf in my new office. A few days before Christmas, Callista texted, "You ruined my life." I didn't open it. I deleted it before the preview finished loading. Then I opened my window. The air was cold, snow gently trailing from the gray sky. Boise winter always made the city feel like it belonged to ghosts. I took a breath and reached into the drawer where Id kept the recording, the one of her voice at Thanksgiving, laughing, calling me staff. I played it one last time. Not because I was angry, not for validation, just to remember. And then I deleted that too. I didn't need evidence anymore. Christmas Eve came. A white envelope slid into my mailbox. The handwriting was Maris. "We miss you, let's talk." I didn't block the number, but I didn't respond. Forgiveness wasn't the point. Distance was. I no longer waited to be chosen. I chose myself. The morning after Christmas, I sat in my new office. The heater rumbled steadily. The windows let in thin, honest light. My phone was turned off. No buzzes, no interruptions. On my desk sat the mug Rowena gave me, and next to it, a folded card from my lead technician, handwritten in simple blue ink, to the one who built her own seat at the table. "Hi, my name's Amy, and my father called me his biggest failure in front of hundreds of people at his retirement gala. But what hurt more than his words was realizing everyone around him already believed it because they had helped erase me long before that night ever came. They cut me from the slideshow, left my name off the program, replaced my gift with someone else's. They rewrote the story without me. So I gave him a little box, and just one sentence that made the whole room freeze. But what was inside that box? And why did it change everything? The flight from Seattle touched down before sunrise, but the weight in my chest had been building long before the plane ever left the ground. Austin still smelled the same sun-baked concrete, mesquite smoke, and old guilt. The kind that lingers in the corners of your ribs even after years apart. I hadn't spoken to my father in 6 months. The silence wasn't unusual, it was the default. And yet, here I was, flying 2 states over just to sit quietly in the shadows of his retirement gala. Not for him. For me. The Driscoll Hotel loomed with its grand stone columns and velvet accents like a southern monarch that refused to age. I stood in the lobby longer than I needed to, not because I was unsure, but because I knew exactly what this place represented, every room curated for pride, every detail a mirror to reflect back the version of him he wanted the world to see. I checked in under my own name. That would become ironic later. In my suite, I pulled the dress from its plastic cover, steam-pressed but simple. Not showy, not forgettable. I'd spent more time choosing the wrapping paper for the box tucked inside my carry-on than I had on what to wear. Navy blue, with a thin silver ribbon. Understated. Intentional. Inside was something small, something he had kept for over 2 decades. I wasn't here to make a speech. I wasn't even listed in the program as a guest of honor. And that was fine. Expected even. But part of me still hoped for something. Maybe just the dignity of being acknowledged. By the time I arrived at the ballroom, the space was already half full. Servers wove between tables like practiced dancers. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I approached the check-in desk. The young woman smiled politely. Name? Amy Colburn. She frowned at her list, finger scrolling, then tapping. Oh, you're... Maya Colburn? No, Amy. Another pause. You're at table 19. Table 19 was in the back, past the sponsors, past the engineers, even behind the local press. My place card had a typo Maya. The irony wasn't lost on me. I slid into the seat without protest. The linen napkin was already folded like a swan. A man in a beige jacket next to me leaned in. You with catering? I blinked. No. He chuckled, sipping his wine. Sorry. Thought you looked familiar. I didn't correct him. I'd grown used to being misfiled, misnamed, mislabeled. It was safer to stay quiet and let people build their own convenient narratives. The lights dimmed. The slideshow began. Large screens flickered to life above the stage, displaying a montage of Virgil Kessler's life in 30-second intervals. Childhood photos, teenage football trophies, wedding shots, boardroom triumphs. Then came the family section. Denton's military commendations, Callista's PR awards, their wedding, the birth of their daughter. More applause. Then more pictures, Virgil shaking hands with congressmen, giving keynote addresses, standing beside rocket prototypes. Not a single frame included me. Not my high school science award, not my college graduation, not my promotion to lead systems engineer. Not even the blurry photo from when I visited Mom in the hospital that one Thanksgiving. It was as if I'd never existed. Someone at the table whispered, "Didn't know Virgil only had 2 kids." Another replied, "Maybe she's like PR team or something?" I excused myself. The hallway outside was quiet, carpeted, heavy with the kind of insulation that kept power brokers' secrets from escaping. I leaned against the cool marble wall near the restroom and let the sting behind my eyes dissolve before it could turn into tears. I wasn't going to cry in a hallway, not for a man who hadn't asked about me in years. My phone buzzed. A message half-typed sat unsent. They didn't even get my name right. I considered sending it to my mother, then deleted it. In the mirror, I fixed my hair, smoothed my lipstick, and whispered to my reflection, "You came for you. Don't forget that." And I wouldn't. That night, I didn't sleep. I drafted a letter that made silence into a sound they couldn't ignore. When someone rewrites your history long enough, you start picking up the pen whether you're ready or not. The applause hadn't even faded when the ballroom lights dimmed again. A soft instrumental played one of those nostalgic tracks that always suggested something profound was coming. I knew what came next. My father, Virgil Kessler, master of ceremony, hero of his own narrative, would take the stage. The room shifted in anticipation. Champagne glasses were straightened. Chairs scooted forward. Every eye turned toward the man who'd built both a defense company and his own myth from the ground up. He approached the podium like a general. I'd seen him command rooms before briefings with the Pentagon, investor summits, school fundraisers. But tonight, his gait was even more precise. His navy suit, tailored within an inch of arrogance, held every thread of his legacy together. He began with the expected a deep breath, a pause, and a smile perfectly rehearsed. "It's hard to believe it's been 42 years," he said. 42 years of building, leading, and learning. But none of it would mean a thing without family. The room warmed. People nodded. "Denton," he continued, turning toward my brother, "you've made me proud every step of the way. Your discipline, your service, your loyalty to the legacy." Applause followed. Denton raised his glass in a modest, controlled salute. He knew this script by heart. My stomach began to harden. I glanced toward my mother, sitting 5 tables over. Her eyes stayed fixed on her folded hands. "And to my daughter-in-law, Callista," Virgil went on, smiling directly at her. "You came into our lives and became the daughter I never had but always hoped for." There it was. The daughter I never had. Those words didn't just echo, they pierced, like a bell rung directly into my bones. Callista, perfectly composed, leaned into the praise like it was sunlight. She touched her chest, mouthed, "Thank you," as if she hadn't orchestrated her way into every family photo I was excluded from. Applause swelled again. Some guests stood to clap. The lighting caught the shimmer of her gown, the glass in her hand, the ring Virgil had insisted on gifting her personally after the wedding. I didn't move, not an inch. He wasn't finished. "Of course," he added, letting his voice drop to that folksy, faux humble tone he saved for impact. "Not every child chooses to follow the path. Some take different roads. And that's okay. Sometimes they're reminders of what doesn't work. They teach you what failure looks like." There wasn't laughter at first. Just an awkward pause. Then, a polite chuckle or two. The kind that floats through a room when people aren't sure if a joke is safe to laugh at. I didn't need to hear my name. Every nerve in my body recognized the outline of an insult dressed up as philosophy. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for my drink. I let the weight of the moment settle around me like fog. Denton glanced in my direction, then quickly away. Callista adjusted her necklace, pretending not to notice. And my mother, God. My mother. She still stared at her lap. The worst part wasn't the dig. The worst part was that no one flinched. A waiter appeared beside me with a fresh flute of champagne. I waved it off. He left it anyway. This was the moment most people would get up and leave. I didn't. Not because I was trying to make a statement, but because walking out would have felt like conceding a game I didn't agree to play. So I stayed. I sat there through the closing remarks, through the final toast, through more laughter and praise and well-earned nostalgia that had no space carved out for me. As the lights brightened and the stage cleared, I heard someone at a nearby table murmur, "She's got to be PR or something. No way she's family." I didn't look. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled my phone from my clutch and opened a text to my best friend back in Seattle. He did it. Called me a failure. On stage. I stared at the screen, then deleted it. The navy blue box under my table brushed against my ankle. It had stayed there, untouched. Quiet. Just like me. I glanced toward the stage again. My father was shaking hands, smiling for photos, holding Callista's elbow like she was the prize at the end of a race I was never invited to run. This would be the last time I let him write my story. If you erase someone long enough, you start to believe they were never there, unless they start writing themselves back in. I stepped out into the corridor, while the gala buzzed on without me. The low hum of clinking glasses and muffled laughter faded as the thick hotel walls swallowed the noise. The carpet was soft beneath my heels, but the chill in the air conditioning seeped right through the silk of my dress. For a moment, I let myself lean against the cool marble, my eyes drifting over the tall ceilings and mahogany accents that reminded me of conference centers where my father used to speak. He loved a microphone, loved an audience even more. I'd grown up watching him dominate rooms like this, lecturing on leadership, innovation, legacy. Always that word, legacy. He'd say it like it was holy, like it needed to be protected, passed down, polished until it gleamed. But I had once stood on a stage of my own. That memory had waited quietly for years, and now it returned like a tide I couldn't stop. I was 28 when I got the letter. I'd been chosen to represent the U.S. in a multinational aerospace initiative. Only 10 scientists were selected nationwide, the kind of opportunity that builds careers, that changes lives. There was just one thing missing: a signature from an industry sponsor. And with my affiliation to Kessler Advanced, his company, Virgil, was the natural choice. My choice. I remember sitting across from him in his office. It still smelled like old wood and expensive ink. I handed him the form with a hopeful smile. He read it, paused, then handed it back without looking me in the eye. "I can't sign this," he said flatly. I blinked. "Why not? If I sign off, it'll look like nepotism. Or worse, like I'm soft. You know how this works." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat had closed around the words I'd wanted to shout. "You'll have other chances," he said, standing, already done with the conversation. But I didn't get another chance. That program only ran once, and I hadn't had another sponsor. Not one who could carry the same weight. That night, I sat in my Seattle apartment, staring at the ceiling. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it felt too familiar, too expected to be shocked by it. What hurt more was realizing that I didn't even argue. I let it happen. I let him close the door. Now, years later, standing in that hallway with the sound of my own father celebrating the people he approved of, I understood something new. He hadn't feared nepotism. He feared me being seen. He feared that if I stood on a stage without him controlling the spotlight, people might realize there was another kind of brilliance in this family, one that didn't wear a uniform or bear his last name like a badge of loyalty. My entire life had been a silent choreography of stepping aside, staying in the frame, but never in focus. Every time I dared to step forward, someone would tug my sleeve with a reminder: don't outshine your brother. Or worse, don't make your father uncomfortable. It wasn't humility. It was erasure disguised as virtue. I'd mistaken quiet for strength. But silence had never protected me. It only protected their illusion. I didn't know how long I stood there before the ballroom doors opened and 2 guests stepped out, deep in conversation about some policy memo. I stepped aside politely, then made my way back upstairs. The hotel suite was too pristine, too artificial. I kicked off my shoes and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the half-open closet. The navy box was still in my bag, untouched, waiting. Just like me. I reached for the notepad on the desk and pulled the pen from the leather folio beside it. The pages were blank, inviting. At the top, I wrote, "What they took from me." Then I paused, letting the ink dry before I added the first line. 2009. Denied international representation. Reason: inconvenient success. I used to think staying quiet was loyalty. Now I see it was permission. The next morning, I sat on the edge of the bed, robe knotted around my waist, steam curling out of the hotel coffee cup beside me. On the table lay the updated event program that had been slid under my door sometime in the night. I flipped it open, more out of habit than curiosity. My name wasn't there. Page 6, Voices of the Next Generation. A segment meant to showcase the family's continuing legacy. Originally, I had been invited to speak for 3 minutes. A brief reflection, nothing formal. Now, that space belonged to my brother, Denton Jr., once again cast as the rightful heir. I didn't feel rage. Not immediately. Just that sharp, cold pressure in my chest. The same kind you get when someone slams a car door too hard near your ear. Sudden, stunning, loud, even in its silence. There was no note, no explanation. But the ink on the program was fresh, the decision clearly made after the gala's first half. I dressed slowly. Gray dress, minimal jewelry. The box stayed in my luggage, still sealed, still waiting. By noon, I made my way to the event planning table near the lobby. A young woman smiled from behind a laptop. "Hi. I had a question about the program update. I noticed my segment is no longer listed." She typed, eyes scanning the screen. "Oh, yes. I believe that change came directly from the family. Said they preferred a unified message. I nodded. I see. She gave a polite smile, already moving to the next task. I thanked her because that's what I was trained to do and turned away. My hands didn't shake, but every step I took back toward the elevators felt heavier than the last. Later that afternoon, I found my mother sitting alone in one of the hotel's quieter lounges, a floral teacup balanced on her knee like an afterthought. I didn't ask if she knew I already did. She looked up and smiled, small and hesitant. Everything okay? I sat across from her. Did you agree with it? She shifted in her seat, smoothing her blouse like it would buy her time. It wasn't my call, Amy. They just thought maybe this wasn't the moment to reopen things. Reopen what? Me? Existing? Her mouth opened, closed again. Don't make this into a confrontation. This is a celebration. For him. For the family. And for me? She looked down at her tea. I pressed, my voice steady. You stood beside him while he called me a failure. You heard it. You said nothing. I didn't want to make it worse, she whispered. For who? She didn't answer. You've always said I was strong. Strong enough to survive what he couldn't admit. But do you know what that's cost me? Her eyes filled but didn't spill. I know you. You'll land on your feet. That was it. That was all I was ever given, strength as a consolation prize. Survival as a badge. I stood before she could say anything else and walked back to my room. The hallway felt narrower than before, the carpet thicker under my shoes. Inside, I reached for the notebook I had started the night before. The pen moved faster now. 2023. Speech revoked without notice. Reason, inconvenient presence. I stared at the words until they blurred slightly. Still, I didn't cry. This wasn't grief, it was data. The truth was this. My silence had always been a service, a structure. It allowed their version of the family to stand unshaken. The moment I spoke, the cracks would show. And they knew that. That's why they never had to ask me to stay quiet. They trusted I would. Until now. I picked up my phone and opened the voice memo app. I didn't hesitate. I'd already written the message in my mind. One more cut like this, and bringing the truth to the stage myself. I saved the recording. No title. Just a timestamp. Proof that the line had been drawn. The box under the bed was still untouched, but it no longer felt passive. It felt like a signal, and I was getting closer to lighting it. They always said silence was strength, that silence was grace. But I've come to learn silence is also decay. It's how a legacy crumbles quietly, eaten from the inside, while everyone smiles at the facade. The drive to Lakeway wasn't planned. I told myself I needed air, but what I really needed was proof. Proof that my memory hadn't lied, that there had once been love in a place now stripped of it. Something about the old house, my mother's house, still pulled at me, even after all they'd done. I didn't want it back. I just wanted to remember it right. When I pulled up, I didn't recognize the entrance. The old creaky wooden gate had been replaced by a sleek, matte black security system with motion sensors and a coded entry pad. A brushed steel plaque glinted on a freshly stacked limestone pillar. The Kessler residence. It looked like a property listing on a luxury real estate site, not a home where a woman once knitted on a porch swing and drank tea from a chipped mug. The landscaping had changed too. Gone were the ivy vines that once climbed the siding like green lace. Gone were the azalea bushes I planted when Mom finished her favorite pink blooms ripped out and replaced by gravel and sterile rows of Italian cypress. It was beautiful in the way a showroom is beautiful, detached, hollow, curated for strangers. But beneath the makeover, I still saw fingerprints mine. The drainage system I designed when the backyard flooded every spring, still there, buried, working. The custom stone patio I paid for when Dad refused to deal with the cracking cement, still holding. The HVAC system, the insulation, the replacement roof, all covered by me. Every one of those repairs happened on my dime while Mom was sick. I wired Denton over $60,000 for it. No contracts, no receipts, just trust. And in return, Nothing. No name, no mention. I didn't get out of the car. Just sat there, engine off, hands in my lap, staring at the wind chime that still dangled from the eave above the kitchen window. I'd bought it at a garden center one spring, hung it up while Mom sat wrapped in a shawl, laughing as I tried to steady the ladder. It hadn't moved much today, just a soft sway in the breeze, like it remembered me. And yet, now, the house stood under a name that wasn't mine. Its foundations supported by my quiet sacrifices, its stories rewritten to feature everyone but me. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the bar downstairs from my hotel. The place was dimly lit, quite exactly what I needed. I wasn't in the mood for wine or anything strong. Ginger ale felt honest. Clean. That's when I heard Denton's voice. He was holding court at a nearby table, his laugh carrying just far enough to make me flinch. I turned slightly and saw him clinking glasses with one of Dad's old work buddies, a man whose name I couldn't remember, but whose laugh I'd heard at dozens of holiday dinners. "Lakeway looks fantastic," the man said. "You've really done wonders with it." Denton smiled like he'd painted the Sistine Chapel. Just wanted to modernize it, make it livable. That was enough. I stood and walked over, my steps quiet but deliberate. He noticed me before I reached them. He turned slowly, smirked like we were kids again, and I was overreacting to nothing. "Did you ever intend to give me credit for what I did?" I asked. He tilted his head. "Credit? The house." He shrugged, still smiling. "It was for Mom. You wouldn't want to make it about money now, would you?" I didn't clench my jaw. I didn't raise my voice. I just said what needed saying. It was never about the money. It was about memory. But even that seems like too much to ask. He didn't answer. Just turned back to his conversation, dismissing me like background noise in a room filled with men who never once lifted a checkbook while I was draining my savings. That night, I skipped dinner. I went back to my room and opened the notebook I'd carried for years. Not a journal, more like a record. A ledger of all the things they forgot I gave. 2017 renovation. Payment never acknowledged. Outcome, ownership erased. I drew a line underneath. But it didn't feel like a line. It felt like a wall. They always spoke about family like it was sacred. A bond. A fortress. But what I've come to understand is that family, in our case, was a one-way contract. One where the fine print read, "You give, we forget." One where labor was silent, and silence was expected. I sat with that thought as the clock ticked toward midnight. One more theft, I promised myself. One more dismissal. One more erasure of my name from what I built, and it'd stop playing the quiet one. I wouldn't announce it. It'd document it. And when the time came, it'd answer with facts, not forgiveness. Because silence may be grace, but it is not justice. If they needed a show to hear me, then I gave them one. But the real reckoning still sat unopened quiet, patient, and heavier than its size suggested. By the time dessert plates were cleared, and the MC made his final rounds with a forced smile and a hollow, "Let's give one more round of applause for Mr. Kessler," the energy in the room had shifted. Applause came out of obligation, not admiration. Laughter was measured. Everything now felt staged, like the curtain had dropped. But no one had the courage to leave the theater. I returned to my seat like a misplaced shadow, uninvited, unclaimed, and somehow still present. The people I once called family didn't even acknowledge my return. I sat there, folding the napkin on my lap, not to clean, not to fidget, but to remind myself I could still feel something. Fabric, pressure, proof of my own existence. My name was still missing from the event program. No mention, not a word. I looked around the table. Denton was deep in conversation with a defense contractor 2 seats down, all handshake and eye contact playing the part of the respectable heir. Callista was smiling at her phone, probably curating the perfect caption for a filtered photo. "Family is everything." And my mother? Her spine stiff with practiced posture, she sat like a sculpture of elegance, unmoving, unseeing, untouchable. And Virgil? He was basking. reclining just enough to appear casual, yet alert to every glance tossed his way, like a king among courtiers. His voice had softened into humility now that the praise was winding down, but the smugness clung to his face like a second skin. Not one of them looked at me. I finished the last of my wine. It had gone warm in my hand, the taste now more like vinegar than vintage. I didn't wince. I let it linger. Bitterness deserved to be tasted fully. Beneath the table, my foot found the box. Still there, wrapped in navy paper, unopened, untouched, like me. They didn't think I'd bring it, didn't think I had it in me to disrupt their perfect narrative. They assumed it'd sit quietly, swallow hard, and vanish again like always. But I had stopped living in the version of myself they wrote. The moment came not with a roar, but with a hum, the lull between courses, between conversations. I stood slowly. No drama, no gasp, just movement with intention, enough to draw a few glances from adjacent tables. The click of my heels cut across the hush of clinking cutlery and murmured chats. I didn't go to the stage. I didn't grab a mic. I walked directly to Virgil's table, the center of the spotlight, the place reserved for the hero of the night. He looked up, startled at first. Then recognition kicked in, followed by that default smile he wore like a medal. Charming, hollow. Then he saw the box. His smile faltered. I placed it in front of him, gently but firmly. No theatrics, no speech. "This is for you," I said. Calm. Even. He blinked, confused, reaching for the ribbon like a child on Christmas morning, unaware the gift might contain something heavier than joy. I leaned in just slightly, my voice low but clear-aimed perfectly, for the lapel mic still clipped to his jacket. "From your biggest failure, enjoy your retirement." And I turned. No pause. No glance over the shoulder. No appetite for their reaction. The ballroom behind me froze for a second. A breathless, charged silence. Then the sound of whispers, sharp, stunned, electric. Someone let out a laugh, startled and involuntary. A few clapped awkwardly, unsure if it was rebellion or support. I passed Callista Hare's smile, now twitching with uncertainty. My mother stared straight ahead, her hands twisted together like she was holding back a scream. Denton looked pale. I didn't stop. I walked past the linen-draped tables, past the golden centerpieces and the fake smiles, and out the heavy ballroom doors. The night air outside was brisk and honest, not performative, just there cool against my skin, sobering in a way no wine ever could be. Under the valet canopy, I stood for a long moment, staring up at the stars blurred by city light. My breath came out in small clouds, proof I was still warm, still alive, still here. My phone buzzed in my bag. I didn't look. I didn't need to. No part of me wanted to know what came next. I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. I didn't wait for an apology or validation. What I felt was anchored, like a puzzle piece had finally slid into place after years of forcing it where it didn't belong. There was no victory dance, no cinematic music. Just the sound of my own pulse and the quiet that follows when you've told the truth out loud, and it echoes. That was just chapter 1. What came next would be mine to write. Without them. Without permission. Without apology. If I was invisible before, now I was a mirror. And the family couldn't look away. He didn't open it right away. Of course he didn't. Virgil was always calculated when it came to image, and ripping open a box from the daughter he'd just humiliated on stage would have broken the rhythm of the night. Instead, he carried it like a delicate prop into the private lounge behind the ballroom, where only board members, donors, and people who talked in six-figure abbreviations were allowed. But someone followed him. Not me. Someone else. Someone holding a phone. The video didn't show much, just him sitting in a leather armchair, the box on the coffee table, his fingers undoing the ribbon like it might explode. Then he lifted the lid and froze. Inside was a photograph. I was 12, holding a blue ribbon at the Austin Regional Science Fair. He had his hand on my shoulder, smiling genuinely, not like in the photos with politicians. It was the only moment I remember when he looked at me without disappointment layered behind his eyes. Beneath the photo was a note. You were proud. Once. And below that, a folder. Thick, clearly labeled, Funding Sources 2021 Defense Grant Initiative. He flipped it open. First page, schematic diagrams he'd seen before. Second page, internal memos, typed proposals, annotated graphs. All familiar. What he hadn't seen, what made his shoulders stiffen in the grainy clip were the signatures. My name, my initials. The drafts from when I had consulted quietly, from afar, to help keep the company afloat during their lowest quarter. No credit had ever been given publicly. The final published version bore no resemblance to me, but the architecture, the backbone, it was mine. He closed the folder abruptly. The video cut out there, but it had already circulated by the next morning. Group chats, whispered texts. One board member even forwarded it to me, unintentionally, through a reply-all mistake. Who is she to him, again? One message read. Another answered, the daughter he never talks about. It didn't take long for someone else to make a connection. Years ago, an anonymous technical proposal had been submitted through the company's Open Research Initiative. It had saved a critical contract. The style matched. The phrasing matched. A board member who still had archived drafts sent them to the company archivist. And to me, I didn't confirm anything. I didn't need to. The evidence was speaking on my behalf. By midweek, I was getting passive-aggressive calls from Denton. Hey, just wondering if you had time to chat, he'd said with the fake warmth of someone standing on a rug that was being yanked. I didn't respond. Virgil was summoned to an informal meeting with the board. According to someone who was in the room, he downplayed the whole thing. She wasn't looking for credit, he reportedly said. It was internal. We all benefited. The silence that followed must have been deafening. They asked for formal clarification. He declined. That was the moment it shifted. I walked through the hotel lobby that evening, wearing the same jacket I'd had since grad school. Nothing flashy, nothing curated. But this time, people looked up. They didn't look through me. A few offered polite nods. One woman, an executive from another division, simply said, "Thank you." I knew she wasn't talking about a technical report. Upstairs, in my suite, I reopened the notebook. 2021, Proprietary Research Contribution, uncredited. Outcome, crisis averted, silence expected. I paused. Then I wrote, now they see. But not because I asked them to, because I let them look. It was revelation, and once you see clearly, you don't unsee. By morning, the clip had already made it to Twitter, LinkedIn, and someone's cousin's Facebook page. I didn't post it. I didn't even know it had been recorded. But there it was. Grainy footage of me standing at the front of the gala, handing the box to my father, and saying the 7 words that cracked open decades of careful curation. From your biggest failure, enjoy your retirement. People latched onto it like wildfire. There was a meme within hours. A slow zoom gif of Virgil's frozen face paired with hashtags that ranged from supportive to uncomfortably amused. But what caught me most wasn't the noise. It was the comments from people who recognized the undercurrent. Women who wrote, "I've lived this," or "I was the invisible daughter too." Then a post surfaced that changed everything. It came from a former systems analyst at Kessler Advanced, someone I hadn't worked with directly, but who knew the back channels well. She's the one who funded the survival project. I was there. That comment turned whispers into questions, and questions into phone calls. Less than 12 hours later, an internal finance officer at the company leaked a redacted spreadsheet. The recipient line was anonymized, but the routing number? It matched a holding account I once used to transfer money quietly years ago, when the company was drowning in budget shortfalls and Denton had been parading around pretending everything was under control. That money, $200,000, came from me. It had been used to fund the company's innovation arm, the same one Denton now held up as the reason they were future-proofed. The same department featured in his interviews. the same initiative he credited in the toast that followed Virgil's speech. When board members saw the receipts, they asked for a meeting. Virgil refused. Denton tried spinning. It was a family effort, he claimed. We had private supporters, yes, but it was all under the Kessler vision. But then came the next blow. Someone found out about the tribute, the one I had sent days before the Galathi-framed photo, the note. I had tracked the package, knew it had arrived on time, but it never made it to the display table. A tech assistant confessed quietly to a mutual contact. We were told to swap it. Callista said it didn't match the visual brand of the event. What they replaced it with? A generic plaque with her name engraved at the bottom. It sat under the spotlight, while mine was likely stuffed into a closet somewhere backstage. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote the first thing I'd ever posted publicly about my family. I didn't rant. I didn't accuse. I told the truth in order. The funding, the decisions, the silence. I shared why I never spoke up before, because I believed it would make things worse. That I had confused loyalty with complicity. That silence is the currency of dysfunctional families, and I had spent mine for too long. It was never about being chosen, I wrote. It was about being truthful. The response? Overwhelming. STEM networks picked it up. Women's leadership forums quoted it. Former interns, professors, even quiet employees from years back messaged me with 2 words. Thank you. My name trended not for what I'd done, but for what I had finally confirmed. Back at headquarters, Virgil held a press conference or tried to. The statement was short, defensive, legal. Denton's face was drawn in every screenshot, like someone who knew the applause would never sound the same again. And me? I waited. Not for permission, not for applause, just for breath. Then I stood before a new audience and said what needed to be said. If the truth feels like a slap, maybe you were never clean to begin with. If the truth feels like a slap, maybe you were never clean to begin with. 3 days passed before I heard from him. No subject, no message. Just an email with a single attachment, 1 photo. Scanned. Slightly grainy. The same photo I had left in the box. Me at 12, beaming with my blue ribbon, his arm around my shoulder. Only now it was reframed. Cropped tighter. Enhanced for clarity. In the corner of the image, I spotted a reflection, his office wall. The frame hung next to one of his awards. It wasn't an apology, not even close. But it wasn't nothing. I stared at the screen longer than I expected to, trying to decide whether it was a sign of guilt or just a rearranged trophy. Either way, I didn't reply. I closed the laptop and left it shut. Later that night, another message arrived, this time from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly 15 years. Gerald Lynn. He'd been a senior systems engineer back in my early career days at Kessler. One of the few who ever treated me like I belonged in the lab. His message was simple. I remember the first proposal. It had your fingerprints all over it. I was too afraid to speak back then. I'm sorry. I sat with that line for a while, unsure what it stirred in me. Anger? No. Sadness, maybe. But mostly just recognition. That kind of truth doesn't need to be shouted to count. I typed back, you just did. No exclamation mark, no need. By morning, the online frenzy had shifted to something quieter, more focused. My open letter continued circulating, shared by scientists, journalists, advocacy groups. But it wasn't viral anymore. It was being studied, cited. I even saw a university ethics panel use it as a case study. Still, nothing had hit me as hard as the drawing. It came by mail crayon on thick paper, folded twice, with a sticker sealing it shut. No return address, but I knew the handwriting on the front. It was Lumen. Inside, a sketch of me standing atop a rocket ship, written across its side in purple block letters, Truth. Underneath was her message, You're my favorite scientist. Love, Lumen. That one, I framed. Not the news clippings, not the spreadsheets, or the leaked memo, just that. I hung it next to my desk, where I could see it when I needed reminding that not every version of the family story had been poisoned. The day I left Austin, I took a slow walk around Ladybird Lake. The city looked both familiar and far away, like something I used to dream of when I was younger, trying to decide if it could ever feel like home again. I didn't make peace with everything. That's not how real healing works. My father still hadn't said the words. Denton never retracted his claims. My mother remained somewhere between regret and loyalty, as she always had. But for once, I didn't need any of them to define me. I had stopped asking. I had stopped hoping they'd rewrite the story in my favor. I rewrote it myself. As I reached the last bend of the trail, sun glinting off the lake, a little boy on a scooter zoomed past me and nearly knocked over a woman walking her dog. She laughed it off, shook her head, and said aloud to no one in particular, "Kids always have to test the edge before they believe it's real." I smiled. Yeah, they do. Later, at the airport, as I sat by my gate waiting to board, I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed something not for anyone else, not to post, just for me. A conclusion, I guess. Or maybe just a beginning I hadn't dared to write before. You don't always get justice. Sometimes you just get your voice back. And that's enough. Some stories don't end with applause. They end in quiet clarity, when you finally understand that being unseen doesn't mean you were never there. For years, I thought loyalty meant silence, that protecting the family name was more important than protecting my truth. But silence is not grace when it erases you, and legacy should never come at the cost of someone else's voice. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can't force people to give you what they don't know how to give. But you can stop asking. You can build your own table, even if they never offered you a seat at theirs. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to name what happened. And you are absolutely allowed to walk away without guilt. Now I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever been written out of a story you helped create? Or maybe you stayed quiet when you should have spoken up. Tell me in the comments, type 1 if this story hit close to home. Or let me know where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate with you, I still want to know why. What did it make you think about? If this video moved you, if it made you stop and reflect, please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next story. We've got more to share, stories that are real, raw, and worth remembering. Thank you for being here. Your voice matters too. Hi, my name's Venora. I was born with a face my parents couldn't stand to look at. Those were my mother's exact words. So they got rid of me. No name, no photo, just a blank space where a child was supposed to belong. 19 years later, I built something they couldn't ignore. Now they want back in. But what happens when the people who buried you start digging you up only because they need you? Would you let them in, or would you show them what survival really looks like? Let me tell you what they did. And what I became. They didn't see me come in. I planned it that way. The marble lobby buzzed with heels and polished egos, clinking glasses and the smell of lemon air freshener, too clean to be real. I moved through it all unnoticed, like a draft. No one turned, no one whispered. That was the point. The receptionist glanced up, saw my badge, vendor assistant, and handed me a guest packet without looking me in the eye. I smiled once, small, and took it. No correction. Why start now upstairs? Everything gleamed. Glass, white walls, and curated perfection. They'd placed her center stage, as expected. Darlene, my mother. Her voice bounced through the main hall like a luxury commercial, smooth, cold, calculated. She wore white. She always did for events like this. It gave her an air of purity, of elegance. She stood beneath the spotlight, hands fluttering as she thanked everyone who believed in the vision. Cameras flashed. The crowd clapped like trained seals. I stayed in the shadows, one row from the back, deliberately choosing the only seat without a name card. The panel was about inclusive beauty. Ironic, isn't it? At first, I thought I could make it through without flinching. Just observe. Watch the woman who once decided I was unworthy of her last name parade as a pioneer of something she never believed in. But then came the question. A woman, maybe in her 20s, uncertain but sincere, raised her hand. How does your company define inclusivity in a world that still glorifies perfection? The room quieted, just a beat. Darlene tilted her head, smiling wide. Her voice dropped into that sugary soft register she used on stage. Well, she said, let's be honest. Some faces don't belong on billboards. If I had given birth to a face like that, she gestured toward the woman, I'd probably wish I hadn't. Laughter. Polite, sharp, expensive. My stomach didn't sink. It settled. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I sat perfectly still, clutch tightening around the rolled event brochure in my lap until it bent in half. The staff member beside me chuckled, completely unaware he was seated next to the woman Darlene had once asked a nurse to take away under cover of night. The spotlight stayed on her. It always had. She didn't see me, not just now, but ever. And that, more than the words, more than the laugh, was the part that used to burn. I had once imagined what she might say if she knew I were listening, but I was done imagining things she'd never have the decency to regret. All I could think was, she still meant it, 19 years later, and she still saw me as an embarrassment, an error she had nearly erased. I leaned back, letting the fluorescent light from the ceiling cast a cold line across my cheek. My fingers released the brochure. I smoothed it out. I remembered that hospital hallway, the nurse whispering too low, the footsteps of a man I now know was my father saying, "No one must ever know." There was no crying in that room, just silence. They didn't hold me. They held each other. And now here she was, holding court. The applause swelled again. Someone stood to cheer. I stood too, but not for her. I moved toward the exit before the final panel wrapped. The hallway was quieter than the event, muted. I slipped out, leaving my name badge behind on the table near the coffee carafes. As I reached the elevator, a young man in a crisp white shirt jogged after me. "Miss, sorry. I think you dropped this," he said, holding out a plastic name badge. It read, Victoria Miles, Vendor Logistics. I took it. "No worries," I said gently. "Keep it. Doesn't really belong to me anyway." He looked puzzled, but nodded. I stepped into the elevator and didn't look back. The elevator doors closed with a slow hush, leaving behind the scent of designer perfume and catered cocktails. I held the name badge in my hand for a moment longer, running my thumb over the plastic. It didn't sting, not like it used to. I slid it into my purse without another glance. By the time I reached the parking level, the noise from the summit had dulled to a low murmur. My driver, Raymond, was waiting by the car, the back door already open. I nodded at him, slipped inside, and leaned back against the leather seat. No words passed between us on the ride home. He knew better. The city outside rolled by like a memory I'd already let go of. Once inside my building, I didn't stop at my penthouse. I went higher, one floor above, where only one keycard worked. Mine. The rooftop office of Empire Labs was silent. I didn't need lights to navigate the space. The layout was embedded in my body now, every step, every angle. The open glass walls framed the skyline, but I didn't look outside. I never came here for the view. I walked past the minimalist conference table, straight into my private suite. No portraits, no personal frames, just precision. Blueprints on glass boards, models, concept patents. The wall-to-wall shelf held only books, most of them with my own notes in the margins. Not once had I added a family photo. I slid the door to my desk drawer open and reached into the very back. A black envelope lay flat against the wood, labeled in gold. Alder Holdings, Private Transfer Agreement. Inside were documents most people wouldn't recognize as dangerous. Legalese layered over shell companies, dummy acquisitions, trustee signatures. But I knew every inch of it. My firm, through discreet hands, now held 41% of my mother's company. Quietly, legally, irrevocably. They didn't even know I existed in their boardroom, let alone that I sat above them. "You erased me from your legacy," I said aloud, voice low. So I rewrote the ending. I didn't need to say it twice. The truth had waited long enough. I closed the folder and stood by the window, letting the night roll over the city. My reflection stared back at me, not the girl they tried to hide, but the woman who learned how to turn silence into strategy. I hadn't always been this composed. There were years of heat and hunger behind this calm. At 17, I spent every afternoon in the basement of a public library in Brooklyn, not because I loved reading, though I did, but because it was warm and quiet, and no one asked why I was always alone. I devoured books on dermatology, social psychology, anything that helped me understand why people were so afraid of difference, why they looked at a birthmark like it carried disease. Back then, I didn't know what to call it. Now, I call it branding. My first job was scrubbing sinks in a dermatologist's office. No one cared about the girl who cleaned, but they spoke freely around me. I listened, really listened, to how patients talked about their skin. Shame, isolation, desperation. That was the seed. At 21, I filed a patent for a specialized AI-assisted dermal regeneration technology. I sold it under a partner's name, kept my identity out of it. At 23, I was the silent investor behind 3 biotech companies and the architect of 2 industry acquisitions. No interviews, no features, just movement. They saw a girl with scars, I whispered. I saw a market no one wanted to admit existed. The truth is, they couldn't sell to us, people like me, because they didn't want to admit we were worth selling to. My phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn, my legal counsel. Phase 2 approved. Buyout notice ready. 48 hours. I stared at it, then replied, "No, let them come to me first." I slipped the phone into my blazer and walked back to the outer lobby. The night manager nodded silently as I passed. Downstairs, the media wall looped content from the day's summit. Just as I reached the exit, Darlene's face filled the screen. An interview clip from earlier played on a loop. Her voice, poised and clipped, echoed in the quiet space. "We built this brand on precision, on perfection. Imperfection has no place in leadership." I paused, watching her lips form the same line again. Perfection. That was always her religion. And if she hated imperfection, then she'd truly despise the fact that her company now had my fingerprints all over it. I stayed there longer than I should have, watching her face loop on the screen. Same tilt of the chin, same trained half-smile, same cold confidence. I knew that expression better than I knew my own reflection. It was the look she gave the cameras when she thought the world belonged to her, and maybe for a while, it did. By the time I got back to Empire's offices, the city had shifted. Daylight had thinned into amber haze, the kind of late afternoon where everything feels a little slower, like the world is waiting for something to break. I stepped into the building just before 5. On the 15th floor, the conference room lights were already on, blinds halfway drawn. My team usually cleared out by 6, but something about the way the front desk associate looked at me made my chest tighten. "Ms. Venora," she said carefully, "they're watching something in the boardroom. You might want to just take a look." I didn't speak, just walked. As soon as I opened the door, the energy shifted. It was quiet, but not the kind that soothes. Everyone stood around the screen, eyes fixed, expressions caught between disbelief and discomfort. My lead strategist glanced back and gestured subtly for me to come in. No one else turned around. It was her again, Darlene, my mother. This time not in a promotional clip. It was a national talk show, the kind that aired mid-mornings, targeting stay-at-home executives, aspiring socialites, and high-end brand loyalists. She looked poised, of course. Smooth blouse, pressed collar, perfect contouring. But her voice had that slightly exaggerated clarity, the one she used when she wanted to sound more human than she really was. The host asked, "With this new wave of alternative beauty being embraced by younger generations, where do you stand on inclusivity within the luxury space?" Darlene didn't hesitate. "Honestly, I think it's dangerous," she said with a polished shrug. Some people just weren't meant to be public figures. Society doesn't benefit from lowering its standards. We thrive on aesthetics, not pity. A few heads in the room shifted. No one said a word. The host, maybe sensing the tightness in the air, tried to soften the blow. Even when they work hard to get there? Darlene laughed. Lightly, but it stung like steel. Hard work doesn't make you presentable. That line hit like she'd walked right into our building and whispered it in my ear. Like she knew I'd be watching. I kept my jaw still, didn't clench it, didn't twitch, just stared. When you grow up with that kind of rejection, you learn how to absorb it in layers. First, it stings. Then it settles. Eventually, it becomes wallpaper, always there, dulling everything else around it. But this time, it cracked something. The applause started to roll in. Shallow, performative claps from an audience more trained than moved. The host smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind me, one of the interns whispered, "Isn't that your—" I turned slightly, just enough to meet his eyes, and said, "No, that's just the face of the company I'm about to dismantle." He blinked. I turned back to the screen. The broadcast cut to a commercial, a promo about collagen boosters featuring dancers in silk robes twirling under soft lighting. But the room didn't breathe. I walked over to the window, pushing the blinds open a little more. Seattle's skyline stretched out in front of me. Rain threatened in the distance, but hadn't fallen yet. Kind of like me. When I was 8, I'd hidden behind a velvet curtain at a fundraising event. Not because I was playing or being shy, but because I wasn't allowed to be seated at the family table. I'd overheard her then, too, laughing with a donor. "Let's just not talk about the girl tonight," she had said. "Not my daughter, just the girl. The difference between hiding someone and erasing them? About 2 press conferences." I stepped away from the window and grabbed the remote from the table. I rewound the clip, let it play again. "Imperfection has no place in leadership," she'd said. I pressed pause. Out in the hall, I could hear the shuffle of my staff slowly returning to their desks. No one mentioned it. No one dared. Back at my desk, my phone buzzed. Evelyn had already seen the broadcast. "Don't respond yet," her message read. "Let them dig the hole. We'll bring the spotlight when it's deep enough." I smiled. Not the triumphant kind. The tired kind. The kind you give yourself when you realize you don't need to scream anymore to be heard. I built something too. The difference is, mine includes everyone she threw away. I stayed late that evening. After the board cleared out and the screens dimmed, I returned to my office with the kind of silence that doesn't settle. It waits. Outside, Seattle's skyline blinked behind fogged glass, and inside, the only light came from the blue hue of my desktop monitor. The city had slowed to a hush, but something in me kept pacing. I opened my inbox, expecting routine. End-of-day summaries, investment updates, supplier complaints. Instead, at the top, was a new message with no subject line. The sender was blank, but the subject wasn't what caught my breath. It was the label. "For your eyes only. Timestamp 1994. That year, that cursed, silent, too clean year. I clicked. It wasn't a typical file. No logo, no intro, just grainy security footage. Date stamped, hospital hallway. The audio was slightly warped at first, but quickly stabilized. A younger Darlene came into frame, seated stiffly on a bench in a pale blue hospital gown under a tan trench coat. Her hair was a mess, her posture sharp. She held a paper cup of water in one hand, but didn't drink it. Her lips moved before the audio caught up. "I looked at her face and I felt bile rise," she said. I didn't blink. "I swear, if we keep her, people will think we were cursed." She wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. Her voice was even, precise, clinical. Then Marcellus appeared in frame, silent as ever. He didn't put a hand on her shoulder, didn't shake his head, just stood. "I won't raise a reminder of everything ugly in me," she went on. "We fix this. Today." At that point, the camera caught her wiping her hands, like she'd just washed them of something she couldn't name. I paused the video, breathed once, pressed play again. The hallway's hum filled the space between her words. The quiet after she spoke said more than anything else. The nurse walked by, holding a clipboard, glanced at them, and kept going. No one intervened. No one questioned it. They let her say it like she was asking for extra ice in her drink. I watched the video to the end. Then I played it again. Not to punish myself, but to witness it. All these years, I'd heard the rumors, the deflections, the carefully worded apologies wrapped in denial. But now I had the truth. On tape. And truth is heavier when it's no longer just your memory carrying it. I didn't cry. I wasn't 8 anymore. I wasn't 15 either. And I damn sure wasn't that girl hoping they'd change. Instead, I leaned forward, opened the secure console I'd built into Empire's mainframe, and uploaded the file. I labeled it Folder 19 Trigger, set permissions to private. But I built in a contingency. If my system was ever breached, internally or externally, it would unlock automatically and push to every major media outlet. Public. Undeniable. Not because I wanted revenge. Because I wanted her to know she was never in control of the narrative. Let her fear the day this goes live, I whispered. Then I screen captured the moment Darlene said, "Fix this," mid-sentence, and sent it to Evelyn, my legal counsel. No body text, just the image and the subject line. Prep the statement. If this leaks, we control the frame. Within minutes, Evelyn responded. Understood. And Venora, I'm sorry. I stared at the message for a while, not knowing what to do with someone saying sorry who didn't have to. I closed the laptop and let the quiet take over again. Around 10, the knock came. Soft. Intentional. My assistant, Ava, stepped halfway in. She held a notepad in one hand, but I could tell she wasn't here for scheduling. There's a request, she said carefully. I looked up. From whom? She didn't say it. She didn't need to. Them, she said. I didn't flinch. I didn't straighten in my chair like some dramatic script. I just reached for the glass of water I'd poured hours ago and finally took a sip. Face to face? I asked. They said yes. No lawyers. Just a conversation. I nodded, slowly, purposefully. Tell them I'll see them Thursday, I said. And Ava, no one else needs to know, not yet. She nodded once and left. I stood alone in the dark, watching the monitor go black as the file timed out. The hallway footage faded into a screensaver, soft waves moving across a digital shore. So she wanted to talk. She'd built a career on public relations, on sculpted interviews and staged humility. But now she'd have to sit across from the one mistake she thought she'd buried and call her by name. The moment Thursday came, the building felt different, colder, even though the heat was on. I arrived before anyone else, bypassing my usual coffee stop, letting the silence settle into the walls before it was broken by voices I hadn't heard in nearly 2 decades. Not up close, not in person. The boardroom had been cleared per my instructions. No assistants, no photographers, no legal counsel. This wasn't for headlines. This wasn't a war room. This was something far older, something primitive. I laid the folder on the table myself. Empire Equity Conversion Agreement. Nothing glossy, no dramatic seals. Just the plain truth, printed in sharp black ink. The documents didn't need embellishment. They were weapons already. At 9:02, the elevator dinged. I didn't look up immediately. Their steps came in tandem. Hers lighter, clipped. His heavier, dragging a little now. They paused in the doorway, as if unsure they were in the right place. I stayed seated at the head of the long, tempered glass table, flipping through a page I already knew by heart. Darlene spoke first. You've done well, she said, voice almost warm. Almost. Marcellus pulled out the chair opposite me, but waited for my nod before sitting. I gave none. He sat anyway. I appreciate you agreeing to meet us privately, he said, clasping his hands. I offered no pleasantries, no forced smiles, just a calm, "You asked for it." There was a beat of silence. Then Darlene launched in. "We've been evaluating a strategic partnership," she began, sliding over a glossy proposal, complete with market projections and photos of redesigned packaging. "We believe there's room for a collaboration between Alder's legacy and Empire's innovation." I didn't touch the folder. Marcellus cleared his throat. "The numbers are tight this quarter, but our assets remain strong. The name, our brand equity, still holds weight." Their rehearsed confidence didn't match their eyes. There was something behind Darlene's, though, like a muscle trying to remember how to smile for a daughter she never acknowledged. "And you'd like what exactly?" I asked. "A joint brand? Equity swap? Or just access to my infrastructure without real control shifting?" She hesitated. "Well, ideally, a merger. Public-facing, of course. We understand your board may have hesitations, but we're open to a temporary leadership blend." Leadership blend. I nodded once, made a note with a capped pen. "You're unaware," I said slowly, "that I already own 41% of your company." Darlene blinked. Marcellus leaned forward. "Excuse me?" "I've been acquiring pieces quietly, through proxy, through trusts, through vehicles you wouldn't think to vet. 6 years. The folder I'd brought, now slid forward, held every transfer, every ledger, every timestamp. "I have voting majority after next month's shareholder meeting." Darlene's face didn't crumble. It froze. Still, like the makeup on her cheekbones had been painted too tight. "This was revenge?" she asked. I didn't raise my voice. "This was insulation," I replied, "so that I'd never be in a room like this, so that I'd never have to sit across from the people who called me a liability and live like I owed them something." Marcellus tried to interrupt. "You could have come to us." "When?" I cut in. "At the hospital? When you whispered that no one could ever know? When you told the nurse to handle it discreetly? Or was it at one of your fundraisers, where I stood behind curtains like a damn ghost?" They said nothing. I leaned back slightly. "You taught me early what I was worth to you," I said. "Now you'll find out what that costs." Security knocked twice on the outer door. "Time's up." I stood. They rose with me, slowly. I extended my hand to both of them because I wanted the handshake documented by memory, not media. "You're free," I said, "to keep your names on the company, your titles, your face on the brochures. That doesn't bother me. But just know this." They both waited. "Every step you take from this point forward is on a floor I own." Their eyes didn't move. I turned and walked out, the heels of my shoes echoing louder than anything they'd said all morning. I didn't go straight home after that meeting. I drove in silence, window cracked just enough to let in the wind, not the noise. I needed space between the boardroom and what came next. A week passed. Enough time to let the dust settle. Enough time for them to realize I hadn't just shaken their tree. I'd bought the orchard. Tonight's event was held on the rooftop of the newly renovated Klein and Reed building, once a fortress of exclusion, now a jewel in my portfolio. The same luxury fashion brand that, years ago, said I didn't reflect their image, now proudly promoted a campaign on inclusive strength. I arrived through the service elevator. It was deliberate. I wanted to walk the same halls I'd once been escorted out of, holding a rejection letter in one hand and my silence in the other. Back then, I was 20. I'd shown up for a design assistant role in a blazer that didn't quite fit and shoes I'd stretched too many miles. The HR director, soft-spoken, friendly on the surface, had smiled politely as she reviewed my resume. "We're looking for someone who better reflects our brand image," she'd said. I remember folding that rejection letter and slipping it between the pages of a worn portfolio before leaving without a word. I didn't cry that day, but I didn't forget either. Tonight, I walked past that same woman near the entrance. She didn't recognize me, not even a flicker, and I didn't offer my name. Inside, everything gleamed. Glass, chrome, whitewashed minimalism. The theme of the evening was redefining standards. I nearly laughed. I kept to the edge as guests filed in: fashion editors, tech investors, a few well-placed influencers. I didn't need to introduce myself. No one here expected me to speak. I was still the silent partner. But this time, silence would speak louder than anything they'd prepared. The lights dimmed slightly as the CEO of Klein & Reed took the small platform at the center of the room. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began, crisp and warm. "We've been on a journey this past year, rethinking who we serve, how we design, and what we celebrate." She gestured toward the wall behind her. "We believe strength wears every face, and tonight, we honor someone who challenged us without ever shouting." A spotlight clicked on. Framed behind glass was a letter. Enlarged, centered, lit like art. I didn't need to walk closer to read it. I knew every word. It was my rejection letter, dated nearly 10 years ago, signed by the same HR director now sipping champagne at the back of the room. Beneath the letter, engraved in simple silver type, "To the girl we underestimated." A wave of whispers rolled through the crowd. Eyes darted. I felt heads turn. The CEO cleared her throat and continued. "It is with great respect, and no small amount of humility, that we welcome our newest silent partner. She redefined the market while we were still defining our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, Venora Aldridge." There was a pause, almost like the room had to reset itself. Then came the applause. No one led it. It just happened. I stepped forward slowly. Only a few feet. No microphone, no spotlight. Just enough to be seen. From the corner of my eye, I saw the HR director freeze, mid-sip. She looked like she was about to come over. Maybe say something. Something soft, something well-practiced. I offered her a single nod. Then I turned away. Because I wasn't there for an apology. I wasn't there to be accepted. I was the one doing the accepting now. Later in the evening, I was asked if I wanted to say a few words. I didn't prepare a speech. I never do. I just stepped forward with a glass in hand, letting the room settle. "Some of us," I began, "were never meant to fit into frames. Not because we weren't worthy, but because the frames were too small." A few heads nodded. A few more turned toward the letter behind me. "So we built our own galleries," I finished, raising the glass slightly. As the crowd applauded, Ava leaned in from behind, whispering just above the music. "We've just received a job application," she murmured, "from someone named Tylen." The name sat in my mind for a long moment. Tylen, the cousin they raised in my place, the golden boy. The one they took Christmas photos with while I sat in foster care, pretending the silence meant peace. "Well," I said, "let's see what he brings to the table." By Monday morning, the application was sitting at the top of my digital review stack. Same last name, same self-assured tone in the cover letter. But the man behind it? Very different now. Tylan Maris. The cousin, the heir apparent, my replacement. He'd once been the smiling centerpiece of holiday newsletters, the face they propped in front of a Christmas tree while I slept in temporary beds, telling myself a quiet room was better than a crowded one without love. Now he wanted a job. I read his resume twice. Good schools, clean credentials. But that same sheen of entitlement still hovered over his words like perfume that lingered too long after the person left. Ava buzzed in from the front desk. "He's here," said he was told to come in person. I clicked open my calendar. Blank for the next 30 minutes. I let her send him up. When the elevator doors opened, I saw him instantly. He looked the same, just smaller somehow. Not physically, but the confidence that once spilled from him had contracted, curled inward. He wore a suit that tried too hard. Navy, crisp, too polished for the desperation he carried. He stepped into my office and extended his hand. "Venora," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't expect to see you like this." "I imagine not," I replied, staying seated. I gestured to the chair across from me. He sat, fidgeted once. I didn't know this was your company, honestly. I'm sure, I said flatly. I need a shot, he admitted. The market's tight, and I figured maybe I could offer something here. You never needed anything from me before, he shrugged, a little too casual. Things change. That much was true. I picked up his folder, leafed through it like I hadn't already memorized every bullet point. You're qualified, I said. But this isn't a favor factory. We don't hand out second chances just because blood used to run in the same direction. He looked up, startled. Used to? He asked. I met his gaze. History doesn't obligate me. Neither does family. He nodded, slow and unsure. Fair. I closed the folder, slid it halfway back across the desk. There's no guarantee, I told him. Apply like everyone else. If your work stands, it stands. He didn't argue, just gave a quick nod, stood up, and left without offering another handshake. The door clicked softly behind him. I exhaled. Not from tension, from the weight of having said what I'd wanted to say since I was 10. That afternoon, I attended a private gallery, Opening Empire, sponsored at a smaller community space downtown. It featured portrait series of children born with congenital conditions, faces the world looked away from, now magnified in soft focus, framed in gold. The space was modest, the lighting gentle. I liked that it didn't pretend to be more than it was. Halfway through the exhibit, I felt someone watching me. I turned. A woman stood near the entrance, wringing her hands around the strap of her purse. It was Nivea. She hadn't changed much. Same delicate build, same shy stance. The only difference was in her eyes. She looked older than she should have. Regret will do that to a person. Venora, she said, barely above a whisper. I nodded. Nivea. I wasn't sure if I should come. But you did, I answered. I meant to write, she said. I thought of you often, but you didn't, I replied gently. She stepped beside me, both of us looking at a photo of a little girl with a birthmark stretched across her left cheek, smiling with her front teeth missing. You turned your pain into something beautiful, Nivea said quietly. I didn't need it to be beautiful, I told her. Just honest. She reached out, but I didn't move. Instead, I let the silence settle between us. Not bitter, just true. We walked the rest of the gallery together. No more words, just shared space, something we hadn't done since we were children, on opposite ends of a decision neither of us made. That night, I returned to my office alone. The building had emptied out. I turned on the desk lamp and sat, pulling open the top drawer where 2 folders lay. One read, Hire. The other, Hold. I placed Nivea's card in Hire. Tylen's application? That went in Hold. Not because I needed to make them earn something, but because not everything that knocks deserves a key. I sat back, looking out over the quiet city. People remember you when they need a door, but I became the building, and I choose who gets a key. Just as I reached for my cup of tea, Ava tapped gently and stepped in, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. This just arrived, she said. No return address. Looks old. I took it from her, fingers brushing the dry paper. The edges were worn, yellowed. Inside was a folded document, a birth certificate. Under Mother's name, there was nothing, just a blank line. I stared at it, a part of me unsurprised. They hadn't just tried to forget me. They'd tried to erase me from the start. I stayed at my desk long after the rest of the floor had gone dark. I hadn't turned on the overheads, just the soft light from the desk lamp, casting a quiet halo across the folder in front of me. The birth certificate sat open, unmoved, staring back like a page from someone else's life. No mother listed, no father, no witnesses. Just my name in small smudged type, as if even the ink had hesitated. At first, I thought it might be a copy, some error. But then I saw the note tucked beneath it, folded 3 times and yellowed with time. The handwriting trembled across the page. Forgive me for following their orders. M. No last name, but I didn't need one. Only one person had been there that day, with a heart soft enough to doubt what she was told to do. The nurse. She must have kept a copy, maybe for conscience, maybe to prove she wasn't complicit. I held the paper for a long moment. My breath caught, not in surprise, but in confirmation. I'd always known I was treated like a problem they never intended to solve, but to see it, codified, clinical, made the silence of it heavier. I didn't feel anger, not now. I felt the kind of stillness you only get after a storm has run out of rain. By early morning, I walked alone through the quiet halls of the memorial gallery I'd built on the lower level of our building. We didn't market it, no press tours, no logos on the walls. Just a space. For truth. For faces the world never framed. Each section told a story. One wall held photos of kids who'd survived reconstructive surgeries. Another featured journal entries from foster teens who had never been adopted. And then there was the section I curated personally. Fragments of forgotten documentation, discarded notes, unsigned discharge papers, and now, my birth certificate. I placed it in a simple glass case, no spotlight, no pedestal. Beside it, a metal plaque I had made that morning at a local print shop. Nothing fancy, just the words I'd waited a lifetime to say. Venora. No longer child unknown, no longer property of shame. I stared at it for a while, not blinking, not thinking. Just existing, fully, finally, without footnotes. Around 10, 2 junior staff passed through on their way to a donor prep meeting. One paused, studying the display, her brow furrowing. She turned to the other. Do we file that under legacy? I answered from behind them, calm and clear. No, file it under origin. Theirs was erased, mine just began. They nodded, neither asking what I meant. Good. That meant they understood enough to leave it intact. That afternoon, I didn't take any meetings. I stayed mostly upstairs, working through quarterly reports and checking the expansion plans for our next campus in Chicago. Numbers were clean, no surprises. I liked when things behaved. But just as I was about to shut my screen down, my phone buzzed with a new voicemail. Unknown number. I played it on speaker. Her voice filled the room, lower than usual, slower. I saw the gallery, Darlene said. The plaque, the display. I want to speak. No lawyers, no press, just us. She paused. I know you don't owe me anything, but I owe you more than I'll ever be able to explain. There was no background noise, no assistance, no signature sign-off. It was the most human I'd heard her sound in my adult life. I sat back, letting the message finish, and then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty, but because healing doesn't always mean inviting the wound back in. She had my number now, but not my permission. It had been nearly a month since the gallery wall went up. Since then, no more calls. No new messages from her. Just that one voicemail I chose to let vanish into the ether. Tonight, I sat in my reading room, one of the quietest places in my home. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, warm lighting, no distractions, just memory and paper and breath. I had cleared the afternoon to go through a final stack of donations from retired care workers, letters, forms, sometimes notes written on the backs of invoices. Pieces of lives filed away and forgotten. The last envelope in the pile was unmarked, except for a return address written in a familiar, shaky hand. Althea Aldridge. It stopped me cold. My grandmother. The last time I'd heard her name, I was 17. A social worker had mentioned she was too frail for involvement. That was the polite way of saying no one had asked her what she wanted. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter, handwritten in blue ink. The paper smelled like old books, like cedar and thyme. Venora, I don't know if this will ever find you. They told me it was better if I stayed out of it, that it would be confusing for you. But I never agreed with what they did. not once. You were never a burden. You were brilliance they couldn't understand. If you never hear it from them, hear it from me. I loved you. I prayed for you every day. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger. Althea, I didn't cry. Not out of strength, not out of numbness. I just let the words exist. They filled a quiet space inside me, a place I didn't realize was still empty. I placed the letter gently in my lap and leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sometimes the loudest things are said in the smallest moments. Later that evening, I walked down to the memorial gallery. The halls were dimmed, but not dark. The wall lights offered a soft, steady glow. I moved with a calm that had taken me decades to earn. I added the letter to the display, right next to the birth certificate with the blank line under Mother's name. I didn't add a photo. I didn't frame it with gold, just the letter protected behind glass. Beneath it, I wrote a new plaque in my own handwriting. This family may not have claimed me, but I lived well enough to leave them nothing to inherit, except their regret. On my way out, I stopped in front of the last portrait. It wasn't mine. It was a girl, 6 years old, with deep-set eyes and a slight overbite, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her name tag was crooked, and the corners of the photo were frayed. She didn't know I existed, but I knew her, because I was her. A whisper formed in my mind, not from grief, not from pride, just truth. She doesn't know yet, but the pain can be turned into purpose. She just has to survive long enough to own her name. The next morning, I poured a coffee, sat at my kitchen counter, and stared at nothing in particular. The sun broke through the blinds in quiet stripes. My phone buzzed with meeting alerts, acquisition notices, a thank you email from a nonprofit we'd quietly funded. All background noise. By evening, I returned once more to the gallery. No one followed. I didn't want them to. I walked the entire space again, step by step, every section carefully curated over years of collecting not just stories, but truth. At the very end of the corridor, just before the exit, a new installation had been added. My staff had pulled the most quoted phrases from the public interviews, magazine articles, and anonymous donations we'd inspired. It was a wall of voices. At the top, "You were born too ugly to be loved." That line sat there, ugly, raw, unapologetic. Below it, in bolder font, it said, "You built something too powerful to be ignored." I stepped closer, my heels silent against the stone floor, and at the very bottom, etched into the glass, were the words I never thought I'd see, not because I couldn't say them, but because I hadn't yet believed them. For everyone who was erased, this is your reminder. You are not what they left behind. You are what survived.